Harvey Gibson.
Okay, well, it's Hervey Gibson again, and I'm talking about a project called Sharpeville Counts. And you know what I did in the last video? I proved that as an economist, I can't count. And I was talking about the 4 anniversaries that fall on the 10th of December, and my mouth kept saying 11th, but it was the 10th of December. And what I want to do today is to talk a bit about what we talked about in the old police station in Sharpeville on the 10th of December, just earlier this week. And what it's about is Sharpeville Counts, and it's the principle that you can't improve something unless you measure it. So there were about 40 of us from almost all from the close locality, some from a little bit further away in the Vale, but basically people from Sharpeville talking about counting Sharpeville so that we can design things and do things to make it a better place for people and for businesses, and to help to move it along the path from horror towards hope. And that's the position we started from. And I talked about something, so we call it social accounting. What that means is we build a great big table, and in the table we have the people, we have the businesses, we have the government, and we have the rest of the world, and we're talking about what goes on between them economically and socially, and what goes on within them socially. So we're looking at the families that we're concerned about. What groups of families do we want to address? Do we want to look at families where there isn't anybody able to get an income from outside? Do we want to look at families where there's only one? Do we want to look at families with lots of children, with very few children? Different types of families with different issues. Do we want to look at companies that are established in Sharpeville, or are we looking at those established from outside, elsewhere in South Africa, or from abroad? And we're looking at how they exchange things and pass money between them. And we're making sure that it all adds up, because in your accounts, what comes in has to go out. And what goes out has to come in, so that if a family needs to buy food, it needs an income. Needs an income to buy the food, and we're putting all that together into one big table, which we call a social accounting matrix. And we're and we're doing it in really 3 phases. First of all, we're defining what groups of institutions of families are we concerned about? What are the areas of Sharpeville? Where are the places where there might be particular sorts of housing issues, for example? What's the geography? What's the importance of the distance from Sharpeville to Joburg, or to Vanderbilt Park, or the Three Valleys? And as institutions, the mapping. We're looking at the assets that Sharpeville's got, the buildings that it's got, the streets and the roads, the human assets, the human capital that's in there. We're looking at the natural assets, the dam and the river. We're looking at the geography, as I've said, the relationships with other places. We're looking at innovation. We're saying, well, what is there that's important about Sharpeville that we're never going to find out from looking at the past or looking at the present? So what is there about innovation within the township? What are the networks that we're in with other townships and our relationships with our neighbours? And what we economists call our externalities? For example, what's the environmental effect that we have on the environment all around us? Institutions, families and companies, and so on. Mapping. assets, geography, innovation, neighbours and networks, and externalities. Imagine. That's the first part, and we're already starting on that. And I'm talking now on a Friday. We first met just 3 days ago on a Tuesday, and all the people wanted to come together again, so we're going to meet again this coming Wednesday. So we're getting on with that imagine phase. The next phase is to count, and we want to count the people and what the inputs and the outputs are to people's lives, and economic and social, and we want to count the businesses. What are the inputs and the outputs to the different kinds of businesses that we have here in Sharpeville? So we've got 2 sets of counting to do, and people, Sharpevillians, are doing the counting themselves. So we've imagined, we're designing what we're going to do, we're counting, and then we're going to dream. The dream gets a bit technical. Detailed regional economic accounting model. And this is where we tie the whole thing together into a picture of South Africa. So we're taking the national view, the national accounts that are drawn up by Statistics South Africa, and we're breaking them down. We're breaking them down into detailed industries. So we're not talking about manufacturing industry. We're not talking about clothing industry. We're talking about dressmaking or even embroidery. Getting it down to a very detailed level. So instead of the 5 broad sectors that you read about in the newspapers, we're talking about hundreds of individual industries. So you can pick out the workshops in Sharpeville that are part of that industry, and we can get an understanding of how they work by looking at that same detailed activity. So that's the detail. We're doing it regional because Statistics South Africa is Statistics South Africa. It's a big country, but you want to be able to interpret that locally. So we're breaking it down geographically, and we'll come down. You come down through the municipalities down to the locality. And there's an aside here. I had set up to come and told my friends and colleagues in Scotland, and it happened that the city of Durban said to Scotland, well, we want to measure how the economy works in Durban. Can we take some of your advice? And the guys in Scotland, the Scottish government said, yeah, Hervey Gibson's coming, he'll come. So actually, the week before last, I was in Durban talking to the economies, the municipality there, about the same kind of thing that we're doing for Sharpeville, but applying it on a whole city basis. And obviously, it's different, but the principles are some of the same, and that's great because it increases the use and the tools get better, get more tuned into what we want in South Africa and what we want, therefore, in Sharpeville. So that was an aside. That was the detailed regional. Economic accounting means that it all adds up. And that's really critical because anybody can guess a number. But when you get 2 people to guess it and you say, well, they're not quite the same, what's the difference? Then you begin to understand it and you understand what the difference is about. And that is what begins to make it special and useful for people in Sharpeville. And so we're imagining to define what we're interested in. We're counting to get our local facts right. We're dreaming to get it to fit into the picture for the whole of South Africa. We put the whole thing together into our social accounting matrix, our big table. And that we can then start to use for all kinds of things. We can use it for social planning. We can turn it into a machine that helps people write business plans. so that if they want to go to the bank to borrow money to set up a business or to finance an expansion or part of a business, they've got a language and a source of evidence that the bank can find convincing. And the aim of Sharpeville counts is to get that counting to the closest, most reasonable basis that we can. So Sharpeville counts, we're all counting on Sharpeville. Sharpeville's counting itself. You count, I count, we all count in Sharpeville.